Games are becoming more and more cinematic. Cutscenes, set pieces, and narratives with decisions are turning the gaming experience into something more than pressing a few buttons and having a program react. While certain games take control over what you see and put you into predetermined cutscenes, sometimes the most noticeable cinematic experiences we remember are the ones we make for ourselves. Sometimes we have to make our own experience. Cinematography is a word thrown around a lot in the world of cinema, and in many cases it's misleading and just a buzzword. The simple definition of cinematography is that it's the art of motion picture photography. This art involves lighting, focal length, angles, movements, and even special effects. You see why the word can be misleading? Rather than focusing on one particular cinematic concept, cinematography is an all-encompassing term, and in video games, well, it might be better to just bring up some examples. Games like Heavy Rain or Detroit Become Human, The Walking Dead or The Wolf Among Us, and Life is Strange or Tell Me Why are essentially choose-your-own-adventure books or interactive movies. And these games are usually brought up as cinematic games because of that fact. The developers have full control over what you see. The camera is often in a set position, only moving to follow the playable character. In the cases where the camera is free-flowing, you're often confined to a smaller open area, and the only way forward is to find a specific set of items or talk to the correct characters. While this is a great way of conveying a specific emotion, showing exactly what you intend, and allows for specific cinematic techniques to be utilized, it's not always the best at creating specific visuals that stick with you. If you've played the games, you might remember a moment when you've had to make a difficult decision, leading to specific visuals that correlate. But the majority of the time, the visuals are basic and, while maybe cinematic, definitely not memorable. One of my favorite games full of cinematic shots is Fury. Fury uses cutscenes, world building, and cinematic stretches that contrast the gameplay's pace to create a very unique feeling. The camera is often placed in weird positions, at Dutch angles, and uses a contrasting focal length to turn slow and story-heavy segments into cinematically interesting set pieces. In the game, you battle different enemies, and sometimes their attacks frame and impact how you perceive the levels. The fact that your foes inhibit your ability to move around freely changes your perception of what is a playable area and how you look at the scene as a whole. Once again, the camera is placed in a predetermined spot and follows the character as you move around, and the enemies are the ones in control of what you can and can't do. While the game contains very memorable character and world designs that combine well with the cinematography to create a specific feeling, we're still at the hands of the developers. As long as the developer is in charge of the camera's position, they're able to use tilts, pans, and dollies to frame objects, subjects, and environments in specific ways. The nature of a 3D environment also allows for camera angles which normally would be difficult or even impossible to achieve. Journey, a beautiful game about a journey, is the first step into what I call the planned cinematography. What I mean by this is that we have a free camera view and are allowed to roam around in vast areas that are made to be visually stunning. In many cases, these stunning visuals can go unnoticed or underappreciated, despite being presented to the player in an obvious manner. Omno has the same cinematography style. The worlds are open and full of life. The beautiful scenery makes it hard not to stop and just look. Whenever you enter a new area, you also get an amazing overview shot. And when you travel, the camera travels along with you and frames the world in a different way. When beautiful views, interesting art, and unique scenery is in focus, cinematography comes naturally as we, the players, want the perfect shot. The developer has planned for us to become the cinematographer. Today, most games contain a mix between this planned cinematography and forced cinematography in the form of cinematics and camera angles. One of the best examples is Jedi Fallen Order. It somehow goes from cinematics to forced angles to planned cinematography in beautiful ways. The worlds are intriguing, and some of the most fun I've had playing the game was just walking around trying to find a perfect screenshot for my desktop wallpaper. The gameplay allows for camera manipulation, allowing you to frame the world and characters in whichever way you'd like. And sometimes when using specific moves and actions, the game takes control away from you to give you a cinematic experience that flows with the combat. What's great about Jedi Fallen Order is the fact that we can travel between large-scaled levels with unique environments and never feel like we've missed out on content. In this sense, it's quite similar to open-world games like Breath of the Wild or Elden Ring. Yes, there are cinematics in all of these games, but in open-world games, 90% of the time you're left to your own devices. Gameplay is rarely interrupted, if at all, by cinematics, like in Fallen Order. But this also means you are the cameraman of your own battle at all times. If you get an epic parry or crit, you yourself have to position the camera for the best experience. In Breath of the Wild, sometimes a cinematic shot is also a tool for utility. Trying to parry lasers from the ancient machines or Ganon is way easier with a good perspective, and the use of slow motion enhances the feeling of accomplishment. Open worlds usually contain vast areas in which you can find beauty. I'll call this personalized cinematography. Sure, there are a lot of cool areas, and you could argue that since these areas are made to be beautiful, this is also just planned cinematography. However, the scale of the worlds make it unreasonable for the developers to have planned or even expect players to create their own shots everywhere. If I find a weird little cave, a difficult to land on ledge, or even just climb up a random tree, I might find myself with a view that no one, or at least very few people, have seen before. This kind of cinematography is purely for the player. The feeling you get when in control of the camera's position, angle, and what specific part of an area you want to explore is unmatched. This is something only this type of game can provide, and while we miss out on camera movements like zooming, dollies, and Dutch angles, depending on the world, environment, and nature of a game, these cinematographic tools could pull you out of the story rather than enhance it. As you might have noticed, all of these games I've talked about are three-dimensional, and from a third-person perspective. The third-person game tends to be more closely related to movies and cinema, as we are using an outside perspective to perceive a character on the screen. The 3D environment also works better for this, as things such as lighting, camera movements, and angles are more easily mimicked than in a 2D environment, where the camera tends to be more static, only moving side to side or up and down. This doesn't mean 2D games can't be cinematic, or that first-person games lack cinematography. What the first-person genre lacks in flexibility, it makes up for in effects, perspective, and interaction. Having another character interact with you, or rather the camera, as if you were the one tied up, having the sun blind you as you walk out of a cave, or having your vision disturbed by effects, only work in first person. These things will move the story forwards and enhance emotions through the use of cinematography, only available in first-person games. In the observer, you start to question who you are, as in who the character is, because of the effects that impact your vision. The cinematography gives us an insight to who or what the playable character is, and how they feel. Similarly, 2D games can use this same idea in a very effective way. In Omori, your vision becomes blurry, darker, and tunneled when the main character gets a panic attack or is frightened. In Ori, the camera zooms in or pans along with Ori's gaze. It also adapts to the scale of the current area, so you feel cramped or free depending on your situation. In Hollow Knight, certain areas can't be reached without the correct power-up, and as you gain new abilities, the world changes, and you start to see it in a new light. Shortcuts and new areas suddenly appear everywhere, reframing the areas you've already visited. Cinematography is the art of motion picture photography, and in games, the camera impacts how we perceive the worlds we explore, but also how we play a game. If the developers want to create a specific emotion, it's easier done with full control over the camera and the cinematographic tools such as lighting, movements, and effects. Sometimes, how you play a game impacts the cinematics you get to experience. These kinds of cinematics can be more impactful than predetermined cutscenes. For some of the most memorable shots in games, the developers help you create the perfect shot, giving you beautiful views that you just have to stop to take in. This gives more free control to you as a player and has brought us some of the best wallpapers out there. And sometimes, to get the most unique shots, the developer has to let us go in our own direction to find a spot we feel attached to. We get to personalize our experience and pick what we enjoy to look at the most. Sometimes, we have to make our own experience. If you want to experience more videos like this, then subscribe and leave a like or a comment. A huge thanks to ACJC for his inspiration in this video. Go check that out as well. My name's Turtle-kun. Remember to eat well, sleep well, and I'll see you in the next video.